Shalom. I wanted to share this message that came to me about making sure that we're fighting the right battles. Are you fighting the battle that the Most High needs for you to fight, what He's given you to fight? Or are you fighting a battle based on your zeal, based on your flesh, based on your emotions? A lot of times we say we're standing for Yah, we're standing for Yah, or we're fighting some type of something that we think that people shouldn't be doing, and we're fighting for this topic, and we're standing 10 toes down on another one, and we're going after people and attacking people and attacking things that we think that we are defending the name of Yah. We are defending his honor. We are defending him, in regards to these various things that are going on. And sometimes we are moving in our own understanding, right? So the example that I want to give for this is, let's go to when the Messiah is being apprehended. So let's go to Peter, right? So let's go back a little bit. So the Messiah, he knows that he's getting ready to die, right, by the will of the Father. And so he's begins to feel grieved about this. So he goes to take his disciples with him to pray, right? So he takes them to the Garden of Gethsemane with him, and they go to pray. So he asks for them to pray with him, right? That's what he asked for. He said, pray with me, right? And so he goes forward to pray and comes back and finds them all sleeping, right? So this happens a couple of times, and they're not able to endure with him in prayer, right? So he tells them that, the flesh, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So after a while, he ends up, leaving there. He prays and does what he needs to do, but he moves on from there. So later on, when Judas and the soldiers approach him, we have him being willing to give himself over. The Messiah is, but we see where Peter pulls out a sword, right, and ends up cutting off the ear of one of the high priest's servants, right? So if we go back a little while before this, Peter, when Yahushua was revealing that he was he was coming to the end of his time and that he was going to have to die, Peter intervened and is like, Yah forbid, he's like, and tells him that he that's not going to happen. And the Messiah rebukes him and says that, hey Peter, like, this is get behind me, Satan. He identifies that adversarial spirit that's trying to convince him against the will of Yah. So he comes, so he rebukes Peter and rebukes that spirit, and tells him that he doesn't have the things of Yah in mind, right? He doesn't have the right mindset. He's thinking about the things of the flesh, of the man. He's thinking carnally, right? He doesn't see, the bigger picture. He doesn't see the plan of Yah. So he rebukes Peter for this. And we see that Peter is in the wrong mindset, right? So he has the right intentions, right? He has the right, or the right, he's basing it off of his concern for, and in something that people would think, okay, if somebody knows that they're going to die, typically you would try to avoid that, right? But so it's a human feeling, a human emotion. But like he said, he had human things in mind. He didn't have the things of Yah in mind. So that was putting him in the place of an enemy. So he's trying to fight against the will of Yah, right? So he's fighting against the wrong thing. All right, so this continues. So when it gets to the point where Yahushua is going to be apprehended, Peter pulls out his sword and cuts off the ear of the servant, right? So Yahushua has to rebuke him there, and he says, if he didn't want to be given over, he could call down, the Malachim, the angels, to be able to protect him, right? But he did not do that. So what Yahushua has to do is he reaches out to heal and restore the ear of the high priest's servant whose ear was cut off, right? So he has to go behind Peter and heal the man's ear, right? Because it was not the will of Yah um, to avoid being apprehended, right? So we have Peter here where he's fighting the wrong battle. Peter's fighting is out of his zeal, out of his emotion, out of his understanding. He wants to fight and stand for Messiah, right? He wants to defend him, but he's fighting the wrong battle, right? So a little later on, Peter gets to, after Yahusha is apprehended, Peter is at the he's seen and spotted by some people who identify him, and they're like, "Hey, aren't you one of the Messiah's disciples? Aren't you one of his people?" You know, and he denies it. So we know the story earlier that the Messiah had already told Peter, because Peter was like, "You're not gonna die. I'll die with you." So he's talking out of his zeal and his boldness. He's like, "Yeah, forbid, I'll be willing to die with you." So and Yahusha was like, "Before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times." Okay. So we get to the point where now Peter is fulfilling this, and he's, the pressure is being put on him, and the people are identifying him, and he's denying even knowing the Messiah. He's denying walking with him. He's denying it, right, vehemently, out of that fear that's risen up within him, right? So he wasn't willing to stand in that moment, right? In the moments where it was, he could have stood and been like, "Hey, yes, that's right, but we see that there's something conflicting, there's something going on here," right? So the time that the Messiah needed and wanted him to fight was when he brought them in prayer, right? So he was trying to bring them into alignment. He was trying to bring his disciples into alignment with the Spirit, right? Because that's why he was praying. He was his flesh. He said that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, and the flesh was fighting him, not wanting, to have to endure what he was getting ready to endure. So he went and prayed to the Father, and keeping his spirit in alignment, with the will of the Father. So he wanted his disciples to also pray, because they were getting ready to enter into temptation, which they did. And he wanted them to have the right spirit, the right ruach. So, but they could not endure. They did not endure in prayer, right? They didn't endure in prayer. They didn't continue on in prayer. They didn't fight, in prayer, right? So we see one of the manifestations of that when we get to the garden, we get to where he's being apprehended, and Peter, not being in the spirit, pulls out the sword to cut off the man's ear, right? Not being in the spirit. We see him later on where he's walking in fear, and he wasn't willing to stand and be bold to say, "Yes, I am one of his. Yes, I was with him." So we see that happening. So Peter cuts off the man's ear. And that's what happens a lot of times when we are fighting the wrong battles, when we are in our zeal, in our flesh, and wanting to defend Yah, wanting to defend the ways of Yah, wanting to stand for it, right? But sometimes if we're not in the spirit to see the plan of Yah, to see in the spirit, to see what Yah is intending to do, we're fighting the wrong battle, and we're not fighting a battle in the spirit. We're fighting against flesh and not fighting against the spirit. So Yahusha needed him to fight in prayer, but he didn't endure in prayer, right? And a lot of times the Most High wants us to endure and to fight our battles spiritually, to fight in prayer, right? To fight in patience, to fight, against our own flesh, to put our own flesh in submission so that we can walk in his wisdom, walk in his understanding and his insights, walk in his the fruit of his spirit, right? He wants us to exercise love so that his power can be manifested, to exercise and stay in humility so that his power can be manifested, to exercise the fruit of his spirit so that his counsel can come forth. He wants us to fight in the spirit so that we can be fighting the good fight of faith, right? He wants us to stay in the right standing. So the biggest battle that we have a lot of times is us being in the right position so that Yah's will can come forth and be done. But we stay in the place of our flesh, and we end up cutting off people's ears. So now we have people who can no longer hear, who are no longer willing to hear the message of Yah. They're no longer willing to hear the truth. They're no longer in a place where they can receive the truth. And they're in a place where they now need Yahusha, they need Messiah, they need Yah to come and bring healing to them, to restore their ability to hear. So now we have people who are broken, who are damaged, who are wounded, who need restoration, who need healing because of another servant who in their zeal cut off their ear, right? Attack them in the flesh, attack them out of flesh, right? So if we're out here attacking people from the zeal of our flesh, and not in the wisdom of the Spirit, we're wounding and damaging people and destroying their ability to hear and receive the true word and the true understanding of the Most High, right? So thankfully, in this example, everything happens that should happen. So it was the will of Yah. Even though Peter was in his flesh, it was the will of Yah that happened, so that for the mercy of this man who was able to see the miracle and experience a miracle in that moment. Can you imagine having your ear cut off and then having the Messiah touch your ear and heal it in that moment? Can you imagine the transformation of heart and understanding that would happen in that person? So it was so Yah works all things out for good, right? So he works all things out for good for those who love him. So that man, that intention was made for that man, or for whoever was looking on in that moment, who it was for, to be able to have a transformation of their heart and of their spirit, right? So the Most High uses that for good, and the Most High will also use whatever pain that we go through, whatever pain that we may experience at the hands of somebody being misguided or misled, or wrongfully moving, misunderstanding, whatever pain that we may experience, right? The Most High can come along and use that experience for us to be able to experience his healing and restoration, so that we can receive him and understand him in a greater way. So the Most High will restore, right, us when we have been the recipient of that on the other side, if we allow him, right? So we don't want to be in a place where we are no longer willing to hear because we have been because our ears have been cut off by another person, right? We want to receive that healing, but we don't want to be the vessel that is doing the damage, right? So we want to be able to fight the right fight, right? So because a lot of times we're doing all this, we're willing to stand for all these fleshly things, we're willing to stand for all these surface level things, we're willing to stand and defend Yah for things that he hasn't asked to be defended for, or things that aren't even directly his concern, that aren't the weightier matters of the faith, that aren't the things that are of salvation issues, right? We're fighting for things that are our own pet peeves and our own preferences and our own sore spots, right? We're fighting for those things, and we're missing out on what Yah really wants us to battle against, right? What he really wants us to stand against, the way in the maneuvers, the way that he wants us to fight in the spirit to be able to bring forth his purpose and his will, right? For his people, right? So we want to be able to make sure that we are in alignment and that we are doing what we're fighting what Yah wants us to fight, and not in our own understanding. We don't want to lean to our own understanding, right? And stamp the name of Yah on it, right? And that is what a lot of us tend to do, right? So we don't want to be in that position. We don't want to find ourselves in that place. So Peter later on is not willing to fight. He's willing to do that fighting in the flesh, but he doesn't have it within himself to stand in the day when he was approached to not deny the Mashiach. He was not in a place, he didn't have it within himself. He didn't have that, we can have all this on the outside, but not have it within ourselves in those private moments when he was by himself, away from the others, and he was approached, that he couldn't overcome that temptation. So we don't want to be outwardly zealous and bold, but inwardly, when we're off to ourselves, we don't have what it takes to be able to fight the good fight of faith, to stand, to be bold in the spirit, right? To be able to not deny him in our actions and in our when we're in temptation, right? We want to be able to fight and not deny him when he tells us to endure in prayer. We want to have those things, right? I'm reminded of a song. It's a song, it's a lyric in one of Lauryn Hill's songs where it says, you know, die for me. You said you die for me. Live for me, live for me. Why won't you live for me? Right? And it's in the context of a relationships where a lot of times we will be willing to die for somebody, right? A man will say, I'll die for my family. I'll take a bullet. And he will. He will. If someone comes and physically attacks you, this brother will jump, you know, and block the bullet and fight and will literally die for you, right? A parent will sometimes, you know, a parent will be willing to run into a house that's on fire to save their child, right? We will physically die for people at times, right? But the same husband, you know, the lyrics said, die for me, you know, you said you die for me, live for me, live for me. Why won't you live for me? The same person will not be willing to die to their own flesh, right? To their, you know, in a spiritual sense, you know, on a day-to-day basis, right? They won't die to selfishness. Like, you'll take a bullet for a person, but you won't die to your selfishness in a day-to-day situations, and you won't die and practice patience, right? You won't delay your gratification and things, right? You won't die to your flesh and live in life and in living for a person, but you'd be willing to sacrifice your flesh, like in a heartbeat, right? That's the case a lot of times with us. And it's the same thing in the spirit. A lot of times we're willing to do things that only require our flesh to show up. We're willing to fight and stand for things that, you know, we're willing to, you know, do those type of things, but we're not willing to truly die to our flesh and live for the Most High in the way that he's calling us to live. It's easy to do certain things. It's easy to cut off an ear. It's easy, you know, even though you think about it, him cutting off an ear, that had consequences to it, right? That could have had consequences. They could have came back and attacked and actually killed Peter, right? So yeah, there's consequences, and it looks bold and it looks brave when we're doing these outward things, you know, but the harder thing to do, and the thing that Yah requires, because he says, worship me in spirit and in truth, those harder things come from us denying our flesh, right? Yahusha shows us this time and time again, how the restraint that he has to be able to submit himself to the will of Yah in the timing of Yah, right? There was a time for him to slip away in the crowds, to not be taken, and there's a time where he had to apprehend, you know, allow himself to be apprehended and to trust the will of the Father, right? So we have to operate out of a place of humility, out of a place of trust, out of a place of being willing to die to the flesh and live, allow our spirit to live and to thrive, right? So are you fighting the right battles? Are you fighting in the right place and in the right space, right? Are you doing the battles within and the fighting the good fight of faith, or are you focused on the outwards, right? And a lot of times we're focused on the outwards. We're willing to attack. We find ourselves in an attacking mode of going after people, right? So if you find yourself going after people, after topics, if your focus is outwards, you're probably fighting the wrong battles, right? Because the battles that we have to fight is typically getting out of Yah's way, right? Getting out of Yah's way, killing the things within us, because Yah is always showing us, you know, what we need to surrender and die to so that he can move. It's not by our power. It's not by our might. It's not by our zeal. It's not by our understanding. It's not by our anything, but it's by his spirit, by his ruach, by his breath, by his empowerment, by the wind of his spirit, by the fruit of his spirit, that we will be able to see and experience his power, and other people will be able to see and experience his power and in the spirit of his love, right? So this is what Yah desires. So we have to move out of the way, stop fighting the wrong battles, stop cutting off people's ears and hindering their ability to hear, right? And causing chaos that the Most High has to come back and heal and restore people, right? So we want to move out of Yah's way, and we want to surrender ourselves to his spirit, to be able to do his will, because these are all his people, right? And we are all his, and we belong to him. And whether someone appears as a friend or a foe or an enemy, all is in Yah's hands, and He will bring things to the desired end that He has, right? And we just have to surrender ourselves and move out of the way and move according to what He has declared and decided. And we won't know that if we are in our flesh, and we will only hear that if we are in the Spirit. So we have to fight in the Spirit. Our fight is in the Spirit. Hallelujah. Shalom.